While making his way down a dark back road on the way out to his grandparents' cabin, Rene spotted an unidentified animal on the side of the road. He decided to stop to see what this animal was, and stopping, along with his decisions immediately following, reshaped his love for the outdoors forever. But before we get to his encounter, welcome back to Dark Wilderness. If you've had an encounter with anything unexplained that you'd like to have shared on the show, please email me at the link below. You can also join us on Facebook now, there's a link below as well. And if you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And next time you're driving down a back road and you see the subscribe button, try to walk across, don't stop, hit the accelerator, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounter. Today's encounter comes from Rene and it happened in 2004 up in the La Vérende Wilderness Reserve up in northwestern Quebec by a place called Lac Barrier. Rene was 17 years old and he was living in Ottawa, Ontario at the time, but he had grown up spending every summer out at his grandparents' cabin up at Lac Barrier. And in the fall, he would always go hunting with his dad, his uncles, and his grandpa. They were very avid moose hunters. They did quite a few fly-in moose hunting trips up into northern Quebec as well as northwestern Ontario. And he was no stranger to the outdoors, especially for somebody who lived in the city, and he was also completely fearless at that age. Now, Rene's family had a family tradition at Thanksgiving where the entire family would go up to Lac Barrier to his grandparents' cabin where they would celebrate Thanksgiving together. And that year was no different. The only thing that would be different that year would be the fact that Rene would be driving out to his grandparents' cabin all by himself. He was 17, he had got his driver's license when he was 16, but that summer he had saved up all his money from his summer job and he had purchased his first car. So he wanted to drive out to the cabin by himself. Plus his parents were going to be going out to the cabin on the Thursday. They had offered to get him out of school on the Friday, but Rene really wanted to drive his own vehicle, so he figured by telling his parents no, he'll go to school on Friday, that they would let him drive out. Sure enough, they did let him drive out, so Rene was looking really forward to doing this first road trip in his vehicle by himself out to his grandparents' cabin. Now, from Ottawa up to Lac Barrier, it is about a 3.5 hour drive, and it's through some pretty dense wilderness once you get up into Quebec. Rene was a little intimidated by this, but he had done this trip so many times as a passenger. He had actually driven his dad's vehicle out with his dad in the vehicle with him before, so he was not overly concerned, and he was really looking forward to hitting the road by himself. When Rene left school on Friday, just like any other 17-year-old kid, he completely lost track of time because he was hanging out with friends, and by the time that he was actually ready to start making this drive out to the lake, it was 7:30 at night and it was full on dark. That made Rene a little bit nervous because he knew that there's a lot of moose in the area, especially up in Quebec, and he also knew that the fall was their breeding season and that's when they would be the most active. So he knew that his chances of coming across a moose on the highway now were way higher than it would have been if he would have left when it was light out. And he also knew that his parents were going to be absolutely furious with him for not leaving right after school like he had said he would. But he did the smart thing. He said to himself, you know what? I'll deal with my parents when I get to the lake. I'm going to drive slow. I do not want to have an accident and hit a moose. So that was the mindset he had as he backed out of his driveway, started driving out to the cabin. He headed north on Highway 105 to the town of Gran Ramos. From there, he turned and he headed northwest down Highway 117. He drove for quite a while down 117, making his way through the wilderness, through the hills, really paying attention to the sides of the road, looking for any signs of moose, any movement at all. By the time that he got to the turnoff that would lead him to his grandparents' cabin, he was feeling a lot more comfortable. So he turned off the highway, started heading down this gravel road that would lead him up towards Lac Barrier. As he was going down that gravel road, he slowed his speed to about 70 kilometers an hour because that road was a lot more narrow, the trees were a lot closer to the side of the road, the ditches were smaller, and he was having a very hard time focusing into the woodline, trying to see movement. So it took him quite a while to make it about 20 kilometers down this road to the spot where it opens up into a big marshy area. Now, in this marshy area, he has seen quite a few moose in the past, so once he reached that section of the road, he slowed his speed to about 50 kilometers an hour. Once he was nearing the end of that section, he noticed on the left-hand side of the road this dark silhouette right up against the tree line, and his first thought was that that was a moose, so he instantly started to slow down even more. As he got about 40 yards away from the silhouette, he was only doing about 20 kilometers an hour at the time. He started to really focus on the shape of the silhouette, and something about it just did not seem right to him. It did not match the shape of a moose at all. So at this point, he was incredibly curious, so he slowed down even more, and he actually came to a complete stop about 30 yards away from the silhouette. No sooner did he stop his car that this silhouette stepped out of the bush, and standing directly in front of him at 30 yards was this 8.5 foot tall Sasquatch that he describes as being covered in a dark brownish black hair, had the connular shaped head, long arms, incredibly muscular upper body along with muscular legs, and this thing slowly walked across the road directly in front of his car. The entire time Rene was staring out the front windshield, looking at this thing as it walked across, made its way into the other ditch and into the bush. Rene at this point was not scared at all. In fact, he was the complete opposite. He was actually incredibly excited about what he had just witnessed, and he was kind of trying to figure out what he was going to do now. Part of him wanted to get out of there, but a big part of him also wanted to see if he could find any sign of this thing, any form of proof that, he could go back to the cabin, come back the next day and say, hey, look, here's a Sasquatch print. Like I said, this thing walked in front of the car. So he sat in his car for a few minutes pondering what he was going to do, and then he decided, you know what, I am going to get out, I'm going to go look and see if I could find any proof. So he slowly opened the door of his car, got out, and started walking to where that Sasquatch had crossed the road. When he got to where it had crossed the road, he was pretty bummed out because he did not see any distinguishable footprints. He did see on the ground some of the gravel disturbed, but nothing else really out of the ordinary. So he stood there for a minute, and then he decided that he was going to make his way across the road to that opposing ditch that the Sasquatch had gone into and see if, there were any footprints or any signs there. So he made his way across the road, got to the ditch, looked down, and again, he could not find any solid proof, no footprints or anything like that. And then at this point, Rene said that this is the part that he really regrets. He decided in the moment that he was going to go down into this ditch towards the bush line because he figured that in the ditch there'd be more wet mud, there'd be a better chance of seeing a footprint. So he started making his way down into this ditch. When Rene went to go up the other side of that ditch towards that tree line, he was struck with an overwhelming feeling of dread. Like if he carried on any further, something bad was going to happen. But he pushed through that feeling, and when he took one step into that tree line, that Sasquatch stepped out from behind a large piece of pine, and it was standing about 5 yards directly in front of Rene. It was staring down, looking right at him. Then it opened its mouth and it let out an earth-shattering scream. As soon as it did that, Rene felt it vibrate through his body. He said he felt like he could feel its saliva hitting him in the face, and he turned and he just ran through the ditch back towards his car. Once he was in the ditch, though, he ended up slipping, falling in the mud. He got completely covered in mud and swamp water. He was struggling to get himself back up onto the road. The entire time, his heart was just racing, and he was just filled with absolute fear. Once he got onto the road, got himself back up on his feet, he ran to his car, got in, and he floored it all the rest of the way to his grandparents' cabin. Once he got to the cabin, he was so incredibly terrified that he could not get out of the car. He just sat in the car with it running until his parents and his aunts and uncles realized that he was there and not getting out of the car. So his dad and his mom came out to him, and he was completely white as a ghost, completely covered in mud and water from that ditch. And his parents asked him what happened. He did not quite know what to say to them in that moment. So he just said that while he was driving down the road, he had to stop to relieve himself. So he got out of the car to the other side of a ditch, and then he encountered a bear, and he fell in the ditch as he was running back to his car. He told the same story once inside the cabin to his aunts and uncles and to his grandpa. And he was really having a hard time that evening trying to relax and kind of come down from what had happened to him. His parents, his aunts and uncles, they all went off to bed, and Rene was still sitting up. He was still white as a ghost, and he was really trying to process everything that had just happened to him. When his grandfather came up to him and asked him, "Did you see it too?" And it turned out that his grandfather years ago had seen a Sasquatch cross that section of road too. And judging by Rene's reaction and how he looked, his grandfather did not buy the story of a bear. So they stayed up the rest of the night, him and his grandfather, talking about Sasquatch. And his grandfather told him that he feels like they're not overly aggressive, that they'll typically leave people alone. And he told Rene that the reason he saw this Sasquatch was because it wanted him to see it, and that if it wanted to hurt him, it could have easily got him in that moment when he was 5 yards away from it. Rene has never fully gotten over that experience. He said he used to be a carefree person, fearless in the woods. He said now when he goes in the woods, though, even though he believes what his grandfather told him, he just can't get over that scream and the look on this Sasquatch's face when it screamed at him. And he said he has not been able to enjoy the wilderness pretty much ever since. He still does go out to that cabin, but he does not go outside after dark. He does not stop along that section of road. When I asked him if he had any advice at all to share, he said his only advice is if you're driving alone down a highway, he said don't stop on the side of the road. He said if you have to use the washroom, hold it till you get to where you're going or to a gas station. He said by no means whatsoever ever get out of your car on a dark road when you're all by yourself. Well, that's it for today's encounter. I do have a question for you guys for down in the comments. And my question is, would you have stopped, gone in out of the vehicle, looked for sign, or would you have just kept on driving? I myself, I would have kept on driving, but I really want to know what you would have done. So if you could leave that in the comments, that would be awesome. And as always, thanks for joining us. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.